I'll stand up so I can see your faces, which is a little bit more friendly. So the declared topic is on the Heart Sutra, but I'm not going to do it in a very academic way. Rather, I want to show the positioning of the central idea in the Heart Sutra as it moves towards the earlier schools and the later schools. The founding stories of Buddhism with the current Buddha, Buddha Shakyamuni, it starts with him having an understanding that things are not what they appear to be. That is to say, he grew up in a privileged environment where all his needs were very easily catered for. Indeed, we could say he suffered from a kind of bourgeois complacency. That is to say, there was an ease or a smoothness in his life where he was untroubled. And not to be troubled is, of course, something that we all yearn for in one way or another. And because of that, we often surround ourselves with a kind of muffling duvet. Duvet is like the warm thing you put over yourself. So it muffles you, it means you don't see, you don't hear too much, but it's cozy inside. But then when the Buddha was out on his horse looking around, he saw a sick person, an old person, and then he saw a dead person. That caused him to think, well, the security that I seem to have has no solid foundation. This body, which my existence rests in, is very vulnerable. And it can easily fall apart. So he became interested, what is the glue that holds things together? For example, we're in a building and we can see how it's put together with a lot of cement. As long as the cement is holding the stones in place, we see a seamless shape in front of us. It means we see a shape which appears to be just itself. That is to say, we take things for granted. We take them to be existing in themselves. And this young man, Siddhartha, who becomes the Buddha, started to investigate what was the glue out of which this world of seeming fixed individual entities is created. And he came to see that this is attachment. In modern language, we would call it semiotics. That is to say, we create structures of interpretation and meaning, and then we fall in love with them to such an extent that we feel that they are existing by themselves. For example, if you go to an art gallery and you look at a painting, the shapes in the painting catch you. You feel yourself drawn into the image. But you can also see the brush strokes and the strokes that have been made by the knife and maybe the movement of the hand and so on. A painting is on the cusp. It hovers between these two aspects. It is both just what it is, the thing itself, and it's a history of activity. The artist has built it up bit by bit as she took color after color, rubbing some down, scraping, gradually arriving at a point where it feels to the artist as if the work is done. Most people, when they look at paintings, are taken by the thingness of them. In the same way, I'm interested in the fact that my watch works. I'm not very interested in what goes on inside, because I want this just to be a watch. If it becomes very complicated and goes wrong, then it's trouble for me. And so my ignorance in not knowing how the watch works creates a sweet harmony with my stupidity in just using it to tell the time.
Yes.
That is to say, I fall asleep in the watchness of the watch. When I see something like this, I'm not deeply troubled, because I have confidence in my entire education, being in university and so on. I know that a watch is a watch. So from the point of view of Buddha Shakyamuni, I am a very stupid person. Because when we only see the watch, and we fall asleep on that very small segment of understanding of what this is, we don't question at all. That is to say, the world that we inhabit is made of stuff that we know and therefore don't know. And this becomes increasingly the case for all of us. 400 years ago, we had people who understood how everything was made. Nowadays, we have objects like this that we don't understand at all, and we use maybe 5% of its potential. So this is exactly the Buddha's original concern. What is the nature of falling asleep? And we fall asleep in the dream of our assumptions, in taking the seeming givenness of the world to be something which doesn't require examination. So the initial analysis that manifested out of this was that of trying to break down the seeming givenness of appearance into its constituent parts. So the first analysis that was engaged in was to break down the seeming simplicity, the givenness of phenomena into their constituent parts. And this was done in terms of this famous category of the 5 skandhas, or the 5 heaps, or assemblages. So in that analysis, there is firstly form, which means shape and color. Then there is a feeling tone response, which is either positive, negative, or neutral. So when we see something, we have an immediate, often visceral sense that we like it or we don't like it. Or it may just hardly register at all. Thirdly, you have a mixed category of perception and interpretation. So, that when we see something, how we habitually name it, or how we place it in a category, even if we don't know its particular name, our nosological function, it is inseparable from perception. Fourthly, we have our capacity for formation or association, which brings together a more developed interpretive matrix, which feeds into what we're seeing. That is to say, on the perception of a simple object, many things can come to mind. We don't have to intentionally think about them. They seem to arrive like a swarm of insects or a flock of birds. Oh, this is a plastic bottle. There's a lot of plastic in the world. There are certain ecological problems associated with plastic. If it's a hot day and you've got a water bottle of plastic in your car, it's not a good idea to drink it after a day because the chemicals leach into the water. That is to say, these kind of memories of things you've heard or associations gather around and settle on the object without you having to make any effort. That is to say, it points to the relativizing function of cognitive activity. When we see an object like this, we see it in relation to other objects. So, for example, it's not glass. Glass is excluded from this because it's plastic. So whenever we define an object, all that it is not stands in relation to it. So I can say with some confidence, I'm not a woman. But if somebody says to me, James, you're a man, what does it mean to be a man? Then that's more difficult. Defining something just in terms of itself, without using language that links it up to something else, is impossible. So this fourth organizing factor is the kind of formative interrelatedness of all phenomena, which allows particular entities to come into being. Then fifthly, you have consciousness. And consciousness is to be conscious of something. In Tibetan it's called Nampa Shepan. Nampa means a shape, a form. Shepa means to know. That is to say, we always know something. We are conscious of something. So say, for example, in the summer you've been out camping and the night is dark and you go out to have a pee. Don't see very much. But then in the morning, at the beginning of the dawn, at first it's dark, and then gradually some differentiation arises. It's difficult to be conscious of the dark. If it's really dark, it's just dark. But as the dawn arises, differentiation occurs, and you start to see particular things, the shape of a tree, the side of a hill. So, in this early Buddhist analysis, all the phenomena of the world, both external and internal, can be understood as composites created by the interaction or juxtaposition of these five factors. And linked with this, there were certain other lists of basic ingredients for our experience. So the idea was, if you calm down your speed of mental functioning through the practice of meditation, you will start to wash out the glue that holds together these composite forms. In the two main practices of meditation that are used for that, what's called shamatha, calming the mind through focusing on the breath or some simple external object. And then secondly, vipassana, or seeing clearly, that is to say, observing what actually occurs in its first basic simplicity. So, say for example, in that kind of practice, if you're sitting and you start to take your attention through your body, then, say, you become aware of something in your shoulder. Our normal response is that, oh, my shoulder is sore. But this is actually a conclusion. There are many stages prior to arriving at thinking, I have a sore shoulder. What is it that is actually registered? There is an evanescent proprioception. There's some transient, some passing arising of internal sensation. What is it like? Difficult to say. Maybe it feels a bit like tearing or burning or dull. You can probably feel some sensation in your body just now. Maybe your head's a bit tilted or your back's a bit bent. If you attend to the immediacy of that sensation, it's very difficult to say anything. But if you wrap it in a story, then you can do something with it. So you might think, oh, my back's a bit sore, I need to take more exercise, I need to go to an osteopath. Then there is something to say, because you're talking about something. So if a friend says to you, oh, my back's really sore, you can join in a conversation. It's quite socially adapted. Many people's conversation is largely a litany of problems. But if you were talking and somebody said, that wouldn't be so helpful. How would they reply? it would break down. So what we have here is an example of the social construction of science, which of course is the Russian psychologists and literary critics like Lev Vygotsky and Mikhail Bakhtin were very concerned with. However, there's a bit of a problem, because if you slow everything down so that you just have these very basic, almost inexpressible building blocks, you can't do very much in the world. You become a socially useless person, which was one of the reasons why the Buddha encouraged his followers to become monks and nuns, so that socially useless people could get enlightened, while socially useless people would not get enlightened. And they have to be supported by socially useful people like farmers and weavers and so on. But the farmers and weavers don't get enlightened exactly because they are feeding and clothing the monks who are getting enlightened. So you can see there are certain internal contradictions for this as a sign of social existence. And this is where the ideas of the Heart Sutra come in. The ideas embedded in the Heart Sutra started very early on. In current academic inquiry, there's more and more attention paid to the link between the Greek tradition of Phaeronian skepticism and the development of the Madhyamika critique. Both of these are skeptical in their turn. That is to say, they resist the tendency to assert something, instead of which they stay with the importance of pressing forward questions, and rather to see the faults of construction. In the Heart Sutra is an early stage in this process. It's a very interesting synchronistic kind of document, because it's a document that brings together two warring factions, structurally slightly incompatible factions. For the Theravadan tradition, you have Shariputra, the close disciple of Buddha Shakyamuni. And then for the Mahayana turn, you have Avalokiteshvara, and they collaborate together as a double act, both being inspired by the meditation of Buddha Shakyamuni. So that would be like the United Nations getting Mr. Putin and Mr. Obama to sit down and be friendly. Because the important thing is that what is described in these ancient texts is always exactly what's happening today. Human life is always the same. We have friends and we have enemies. So in the Heart Sutra, due to the questioning of Shariputra, Avalokiteshvara sets out that these 5 skandhas, these 5 building blocks, which are seen as the irreducible basis of all phenomena, both external and internal, all that is me and all that is not me, that these are in fact empty. That is to say, they are themselves devoid of inherent existence. So it's not as if we were somehow to be able to take the cement out of his building and then separate out all the pieces of stone and wood and so on. Then the stone could, if we did that, the stone could then be put together in different shapes and make different kinds of buildings. Because the basic idea of these 5 skandhas, these 5 building blocks, is that they can be endlessly juxtaposed, put into different relations, to create all these many different things that we experience. But the Heart Sutra says form is emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. That is to say, when we see a form, we don't need to do anything to it. It doesn't need to be transformed into another kind of form in order for it to be more workable. What we have to do is to see it as it is, rather than projecting onto it. So, I don't have to analyze the object, because the object that I see exists for me always as a mélange, a mixture of the subject and the object. So, for example, here beside me there is a small tree. It's obvious it's a tree. What do we see? We see a tree. We interpret a tree. And on to that we are constructing what is there. Because we take the treeness of the tree to be something existing in itself, we don't recognize that tree is the end product of a whole series of interpretations which come together very quickly. So, in this first formulation, the Theravada analytic approach, they would be looking at this and trying to observe the process of constructing what appears to be the case. So we might start with the conclusion, this is a tree. Then we try to see, well, on what basis do I come to this conclusion? I have form, that is to say, I observe shape and color. I have some emotional reaction to that. I like it, I don't like it, which draws me towards or away from what I'm seeing. And this is very important because it's starting to show I am implicated. I am involved in this. Now, if I'm involved in this, this is not self-existing. Because when I look at this, I can't take my not liking out of it. It's not as if when we encounter people, places, clothes, whatever, that we stop and we kind of knock on the door and say, I have some questions to ask you. We are already in there. That is to say, our interpretation is inseparable from the perception. Therefore, analysis is actually very, very difficult. Well known now that in modern physics also people are struggling with this conclusion. If the positioning of the observer influences what is observed, how will you be able to analyze anything? That is to say, objectivity is an impossibility. Or, put it another way, objectivity is a literary trope. It is a style. It is a mood, like a tragedy or a romantic comedy. Nothing more than that. It's a way of being. So just as if you go to the theatre and you see, like I saw there's a poster downstairs for Goethe's Faust, well, you're probably not going to be happy watching that play because it creates a particular kind of mood. And probably we could imagine that the theatre staging would be slightly gloomy. And when Mephistopheles comes on, it will be a little bit intense with maybe some red backlighting. Oh, start to feel something. Then you look at a photograph of a scientific laboratory. It's very clean. Staff are wearing protected garments. There is a mood of seriousness. They are creating the theatre of science. A lot of resources go into the elaboration of these structures. We no longer believe that philosophers can bring any objective truth. We gave up on theologians being able to establish the true existence of God. We gave that up a long time ago. But we can still believe that science will arrive someplace where that is possible. Now, the main thrust of the Heart Sutra is against this, because it's pointing out that there is a non-duality or an absence of fundamental contradiction between what appears to have substance and its actuality, which is that there's nothing. Nothing in the sense of nothing existing in itself. So, if I say to you, the leaves are very blue, would you be willing to agree? No. The leaves are green. How do we know they're green? Because they're not blue, they're not red, they're not yellow. If there was only green, if everything in this universe was only green, would the word green have any meaning? the greenness of the green comes into play through its difference from yellow, from red, and so on. So, this is what every student studies in art school, that some colors are complementary and some are oppositional, and that you can learn to use a little bit of an oppositional color to bring out another one. So if you have a painting with a lot of, I don't know, cobalt blue, and you put in a little bit of chrome yellow, you get a spark. So, when we see green, the green seems to be something inherent in the leaves. The leaves are green. They are manifesting greenness. But greenness is not a property inherent in the leaf. Greenness is revealed in its relation to all that is not green. There is no intrinsic or inherent greenness in the green of the leaf. And we can see this also because we have above it the spotlight. Some of the leaves have a lot of light shining on them. Some have a little, some are in the shadow. These leaves in these different places look different. Don't worry about that. We know they all are green. It doesn't matter what they look like. Due to the power of our developed thinking, we know this tree is an equal opportunity employer. It means like as a government policy to give free chance to everyone in the community. No prejudice, men, women, immigrants. So every leaf is green, but every leaf doesn't look the same green. From the Buddhist point of view, this is very, very important because it helps us to see that we don't see. What we take to be seen is projection, interpretation, assumption. Our eyes show us many different shades of green. But our interpretation says, well, they're all green, it just depends on the light. As if the greenness was a true essence, which is clearly established, and the difference in illumination is simply contingent. It's an environmental factor. So this is what the Buddha is pointing to in terms of the absence of inherent self-nature or emptiness, shunyavad. Shunya means empty, empty of substance, something which is self-confirming, self-existing, self-validated. Yeah? If we say that the green is equally in each of the leaves, and the fact that they look different doesn't tell us anything important, then we are going for an essentialistic reading. That is to say, we are against phenomenology. The phenomena show themselves. And they show themselves according to the time of the year, the time of the day, the fact that the dome above me is rather dirty, and so the light's being factored through the dirt on the plastic. You can say these are all incidental. And that the greenness of the green is essential, it's embedded in the leaf. This is our normal reading. And the advantage of that kind of reading is that it gives us a sense of predictability, which gives us a confidence that we have got some sense of how the world works. If you live in this town, you know your way around, you know how the streets work and what bus to take to go from here to there. Knowing which bus to take. When the bus with the right number on the front arrives, you get on. Maybe it's even the same bus as you got yesterday. It would, of course, look a bit different. Maybe the driver's different, the other passengers are different. Even if by chance they were to be exactly the same people, maybe they're wearing different clothes. They have different moods, different facial expressions, and so on. This is what we encounter. But when you take an essentialistic reading, then you say, oh, I'm back on the bus, never mind. Nothing to think about the bus. I just read my book. to get the point here, because it's a central point for the development of Buddhist meditation. Because it opens the door to aesthetics. Out of the Heart Sutra, the development of the Mahayana view, with the Madhyamika philosophy, particularly the Prasangika view, then Yogacara, then you have Tantra coming. Tantra is concerned to allow a complete and instantaneous merging with the field of experience. The word Tantra is rooted in Tan, and Tan means continuity. It means the continuity of all experience as experience. That is to say, we're sitting here, if you just turn your head around and you look from side to side across the room, many different things are revealed just in doing something like that. That is to say, the world shows itself. It's immediately here. What is it? You are at a crossroads, two paths. The path of analysis, of trying to make sense of things, which usually involves chopping things up, breaking them down into seeming constituent parts, then reassembling them according to your model. Or the other path is to be directly present with the entirety of the givenness of the field of experience. But how would I know what's going on? Maybe that's not necessary. Maybe, according to the Mahayana point of view, enlightenment is not knowing what's going on. That is to say, it's moving from cognitive apprehension, so getting hold of things via concepts, towards the immediacy of the revealing of the creativity of the mind itself. The revealing of the creativity of the mind itself. And this is why the Heart Sutra is such an important text. Because what its analysis does, and you can read, there are many books on the Heart Sutra now. The reason I'm not going through it line by line is we don't have enough time. I'll be doing that at the weekend. But the key point is you have a deconstruction of the central status of the individual person, or the ego self. The deconstruction of the individual ego, or the ego self, which when it's directly experienced decentralizes the organizing function of I, me, myself. Okay, so it decenters it. For example, you go shopping. You want to buy, I don't know, something simple, a t-shirt. In the shop, there may be 100 different kinds of t-shirts. Immediately, you know 50 of them are shit. Who could wear such nonsense? Not me. What is the organizing principle? Me. My values, my history. This is what we bring. You go shopping, you go in the supermarket. You have 1,000 kinds of food. You have a little basket. How many kinds of things do you see and never buy? Who buys them? People called not me. The world is full of not me's who buy things that I don't buy. This is fundamental. Each of us is the center of the world. And because of that, we are burdened. It's all up to me. And if I make bad choices, my life becomes difficult. And then I see these other people, and they have happy lives, and I hate them. I envy them. It's not fair. Why did my mother not tell me? Probably she did. Not tell me how to live. This is of central importance. If you see that your entire experience of the world is mediated through your historically collected set of assumptions, evaluations, and interpretive structures, then you see that you're trapped in a terrible double move. As I move towards something that I like, I am alienated from what is there. Because the fact that I like it means that I have already put myself onto it. Some of you will recognize this is a completely central theme in European philosophy. Immanuel Kant spent a lot of time concerned with this. You have the Ding and Sich, the thing itself, the thing in itself. Can you approach that? Can you ever have that? Plato struggled with the same issue, as did Aristotle. That because we filter the world through our existing structures, we can't get to the world itself. This is the motif that Plato sets out in his image of us living in a cave without direct access to what's outside. All we see is shadows created on the walls. So, everything is empty means in the objects that we see, there is no hook on which to hang our assumptions. And we ourselves are hookless. We tell things about ourselves. We tell these to ourselves and to other people. I work as a psychotherapist. My job is listening to people telling funny stories about themselves. They're talking themselves into existence. It's terrible. The sad thing is they're talking themselves into existence, in an existence they don't like. My mother didn't like me. I was remembering again when I was 7, she was like this. Yeah, that's what the person kind of thinks. I'm not going through confessions. So, in that kind of story, the person is creating themselves. Even if you have a terrible childhood and your parents are disgusting, the sun shines, you climb at least one tree in your life, you see at least one beautiful sunset. So shit is not the whole story. That is to say, when you fall in love with your narrative, you essentialize yourself, just in the same way as you essentialize all the leaves on the tree are green. But if you are present in your life, in each day, you have hundreds of thousands of moments of experience. Colors, tastes, shapes, smells, moods, feelings, sensations in the body, arising and passing, ungraspable. You can grasp them as narrative, but that is to transmute them into something which they are not. Just as when you feel the sensation in your shoulder and you say, I have a pain in my shoulder, the immediacy of the raw presentation is disguised and lost and covered up by being subsumed into this narrative of there is a pain in my shoulder. That is to say, we exist in a world composed of events, not of entities. Events which are revealing themselves in the matrix of space and time, and all we ever grasp are traces, remnants, which we then construct. There's a lot of research now on memory, and memory is a very active, dynamic process. We are constantly rejigging our memories, and in fact, when we tell the story about our life to 10 different people, we all tell it in different ways, because memory is relationally evoked. And this is very important, because out of the understanding of the Heart Sutra, moving into Tantra, you have an emphasis on these two aspects of wisdom and compassion. And wisdom is to see there is no substantial basis of self-existing entitative substance in any phenomenon, which means we don't know much about anything. Now, this could be a blessing, because we all have judgment, and we all have prejudice, which leads to foreclosure, which makes us narrow-minded and bigoted, which is not maybe the highest point of human development. Not to know. Well, you know what John is like. And of course, that's the beginning of gossip. Because we agree that there is a person called John who is knowable as the Johnness of John. Well, we all know what he is like. But the fact is, although a lot of the time we are indeed trapped inside our habitual patterning, if you see that that habitual patterning is indeed empty, that is to say, it's not resting on any substantial basis, but it is a temporary contingent configuration of factors which meet and show this and then vanish like a kaleidoscope turning. How do we have the confidence to know who John is? John is a potential. John is a site of manifestation. Just as we are. It's not very nice when other people know who we are. Because then they say things like, oh, but you don't like that. Come on, what are you doing? Because if you are unreliable, and so that I can't know who you are, you're shaking my world. So if you keep people in their boxes, then you know where you are. You know, the extreme form of that is the structure of totalitarian regimes, where you can know exactly what are the qualities of different ethnic minorities, different genders, and so on. As we know very sadly, this leads to murder, mass murder. But when we encounter any situation, if we look before we think, and we look so that we see, we may not need to think so much, because the truth of the situation will be revealed. If you attend to your stomach, and you really listen to your stomach, it will tell you that you don't need another piece of cake. But you want a piece of cake. Who is the one who wants the extra piece of cake? It's usually a mental construct, a habitual orientation, or an emotional lack in a moment. Something is speaking for the stomach. So, emptiness means to see the lack of validity in the constructs that you layer on top of the world. What it doesn't mean is that if you take away these constructs, there will be nothing there at all. What is there is the vitality of the ceaselessly presenting field of experience. This is difficult to do. This is a training that armed police and soldiers have to do. For example, nowadays, because they do a lot of clearing of cities and difficult streets, in the training camps, the soldiers go with their guns into a place where there are doors, and suddenly the door opens and someone comes out. If it's someone holding a gun, they should shoot. If it's someone holding a baby, they shouldn't shoot. There's not much time. That is to say, they have to shoot what they see, not what they imagine. So, for example, there's a case in Britain at the moment of British soldiers in Iraq when the war was on in Basra. And they catch some Iraqis. And just before that, one of their comrades had been shot dead. So they start kicking these Iraqi people in the head. Who were they attacking? Clearly, on one level, they are attacking this particular person on the ground. But in Bakhtin's terms, that the addressee, the one they were really speaking to, were the bastards who shot their comrade. Unfortunately, they didn't catch that one. They caught someone who was innocent. And they didn't want to see that this person is innocent because they are charged up with this emotion. And so they project the interpretation onto this person and they kill him. We can understand this. I'm sure we all experience this in various ways. So, if cognitive analysis of situations is not quick enough in the immediacy of the moment, what can we do? And it was the experience of the development of meditation to try to address this issue, which led to the ripening of the various levels of tantric practice, Mahamudra and Dzogchen. In Tantra, they're primarily concerned with raising aesthetic appreciation to open the heart and merging ego consciousness into the openness of awareness. And these other schools like Mahamudra and Dzogchen are concerned with spontaneity. That is to say, in this moment, where do I come from? Each of us here can tell many stories about where we've come from. The place we grew up, what our family was like, what kind of school we went to, whether we are satisfied with our life or not, and so on. This is a kind of horizontal axis across space and time. But there is also a direct immediacy to each moment. When we don't fill the space with our assumptions and our interpretations, we are just there with it. Sometimes you might experience that, say, in art, maybe looking at a Mark Rothko painting, or with a sunset, or watching the gentle movement of the waves on the infinite surface of the water. Or you might have it just looking in the face of a small baby, a kind of timeless moment. The wonderful clarity and openness of the baby's gaze allows you to just respond. Oh, the hospitality of the baby to you allows you to empty to it. In these traditions, this is called meditating sky to sky. That is to say, if you see a mountain against the sky, you see this is a mountain, this is the sky. But if a sky meets the sky, then there is no boundary, there is no difference. So, when the space of the heart opens and comes out through the gaze, we just receive. And when that happens in both directions, you have non-duality. There is no separation. And the advantage of this, in terms of practical daily life, is that it is directly connected with the phenomenological world. It's not a symbolic ground. It's not a cognitive ground. It's directly there. Some of you may have the experience of running down the side of a mountain or being on a mountain bike and you're going very, very quickly. Generally speaking, you're safe if you don't think. Once you start to think, you fall over your own feet. It's the same when they say, like, if you fall off a horse, what you have to do is immediately get back on the horse. Because then there is just you and the horse. But if you fall off the horse and you go away and you think about it, you develop a new best friend. Because there's me and my trauma. I never thought that would happen. I'm not sure if I trust horses anymore. So then you go to get back on the horse. But it's like a love triangle. There's the horse that I used to love and I was married to. But now I like hanging out with my trauma. And the thing about horses is they're very jealous. So if you get on the horse holding your trauma, the horse is likely to object. I think we know this in our life. Thinking is very useful for some things, but for a lot of life it's not necessary. So the central point of the understanding of the Heart Sutra is to open the space in which we trust the clarity of the mind to give an immediate unfolding of what is there. The Heart Sutra is encouraging us towards a deconstruction or unloosening of the assumptions which stop us being open to what is there. This opens the middle way. We're not glued into things believing that they're truly real, nor are we trying to develop a protective space and isolation and avoidance, but rather by staying relaxed, open and present, what is required, what is necessary, will come into being as us. This is an experience that jazz musicians have all the time, manifest in contact improvisation. There are many ways in which we can start to feel that actually I get in the way of myself. And I get in the way of myself by knowing who I am. So that's just about the end of where we've got to. There are many, many different ways to approach the Heart Sutra. It's both a historical document, which is interesting in its way, a very interesting tool for starting to unlock some of the rigidity which holds us in place, so that we come to replace identity, whether it's how we identify ourselves or identify other people or the objects around us. It's moving away from identification, identifying yourself as being like this and that, identifying other people, objects, and so on, to experiencing our potential as a richness of resourcing, so that rather than carrying the things that we make the basis of our identity, which of course limits what else we can carry, we live with open hands, not without anything, but paradoxically with everything. Because the less you define yourself, the more you can access the many, many wonderful resources that are in the world. So, thank you for inviting me here. I hope you found this interesting in some way. Maybe not what you were expecting.
But maybe one question.
Okay, one question.
If no one has them about this part of your job as a psychotherapist, people often go to a psychotherapist to tell their stories exactly. Is it necessary to come to this understanding that it's not really that important, your story? Do you still have to go into the story and then kind of come back from it? Or can you not go into it at all?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. You can tell a story in two ways. For example, I could tell you about something that happened, say, I don't know, when I was 5. And I could tell it in a way that, when I was 5, I remember being in school and it was really horrible and I really missed my mum and she left me there. And the more I tell the story, I can wind myself into it. So I go from here and now into there and then. And the danger with that is that I'm going to re-traumatize myself. So we might need to do that a little bit at first. But if it goes on too long, it becomes iatrogenic. It becomes a problem created by the treatment. Because we need to come to, I think, it's my own belief, but I think we have to come to a place where the past is over there. And I can talk about the past as the past. So I'm not denying that it happened, but I'm standing in my life now with the resources I have now. I'm not regressing into it. And of course, introducing some degree of meditation into psychotherapy practice is very helpful for that. It means in the last 20 years, the rise of mindfulness as a tool in psychotherapy has made huge differences. Because people start to be able to hear themselves telling the story they're telling. They have some space, and what they're talking about is quite dense and sticky and attractive, and they have some space. And gradually the dynamic of the sticky being the dominant one shifts, so that gradually the space becomes more dominant, and the sticky can move through the space. Yeah. Okay. So, I've enjoyed being here. Bye for now.